What if the greatest player on the Los Angeles Lakers isn't safe? What if, behind the championship banners and the bright lights of Crypto.com Arena, there is a quiet, uncomfortable question hanging in the air? A question nobody wants to say out loud, but everybody is thinking. Could the Lakers actually trade Luka Doncic? Not because he isn't good enough. Not because the fans don't love him. But because of something far bigger than basketball. Ownership. Money. Power. And the strange, unpredictable world of who actually controls one of the most valuable sports franchises on the planet. Stay with me, because this story is not just about a basketball player. It is about a young man who has been passed from owner to owner to owner again and again, like a piece on a chessboard he never asked to be part of. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why some people believe the unthinkable could happen, and why Luka Doncic himself is doing everything in his power to make sure it never does. Let's go back to the beginning, because to understand how strange the situation has become, you need to understand just how much change one man has already lived through in a career that is still just getting started. Luka Doncic was supposed to be a Dallas Maverick for life. That was the story everyone told. A generational talent, discovered as a teenager in Europe, brought to Dallas, and turned into the face of a franchise. For 7 seasons, he was the heartbeat of that team. He carried them to a conference finals. He carried them to an NBA Finals appearance. He became, in the eyes of many fans, the best player in the entire league not wearing a championship ring. Dallas was his city. The Mavericks were his team. Nobody, not the analysts, not the insiders, not even the players in that locker room, saw what was coming. Then, in February of 2025, the basketball world stopped. The news broke late on a Saturday night, and at first, people thought it had to be fake. A hoax. Some kind of prank account. Luka Doncic, 25 years old, one of the most electric offensive talents the sport has ever produced, was being traded away from Dallas. Not for an aging star looking for one more shot at a ring. Not even really for draft picks. He was headed to the Los Angeles Lakers in a 3-team deal that sent Anthony Davis back to Dallas along with a future first-round pick. Fans wept. Some fans, quite literally, cried in the stands the next time the Mavericks took the court. It was described by longtime league observers as one of the most shocking trades in modern NBA history, on the level of moments that reshape a sport for years to come. For Luka, it meant something deeply personal. It meant leaving behind the only NBA home he had ever known. It meant leaving behind teammates, coaches, a city, an identity he had spent 7 years building. And it meant walking into the most storied franchise in basketball, the Los Angeles Lakers, with all the pressure, all the history, and all the expectation that comes with that purple and gold jersey. But here is the part that gets overlooked in most of the retellings of this saga. The chaos didn't stop when he landed in Los Angeles. If anything, it was just beginning. Because only months after Luka arrived in LA, the very foundation of the Lakers organization shifted beneath his feet. For nearly 5 decades, the Lakers had been the Buss family's team. Dr. Jerry Buss built an empire out of that franchise, and after his passing, his daughter Jeannie Buss carried the torch, keeping the team in the family even as other legendary sports dynasties around the country sold off to outside investors. The Lakers were, in a very real sense, a family business wrapped inside one of the biggest brands in professional sports. Fans assumed that would never change. It felt permanent. It felt like tradition. Then, in the fall of 2025, it changed anyway. The NBA's Board of Governors approved a stunning sale. The Buss family agreed to hand over their controlling stake in the Lakers to a businessman named Mark Walter, the same man who already owned the Los Angeles Dodgers and had turned that baseball franchise into a perennial powerhouse. The number attached to the deal was staggering, a valuation of $10 billion, a record for a North American sports franchise at the time. Jeannie Buss would remain involved as governor, but the real controlling power, the true ownership, now belonged to someone outside the Buss bloodline for the first time in the history of the modern Lakers. Think about what that meant for Luka. He had been a Laker for only a matter of months, still learning his new teammates' names, still adjusting to a new city, a new system, a new set of expectations, and already, the people who owned the team he played for had changed. Suddenly, there was a new voice at the top. New priorities. A new direction for a franchise that was still trying to figure out exactly what it wanted to become in this new era. And yet, through all of that turbulence, Luka did something that a lot of superstars in his position would not have done. He stayed focused. He kept showing up. He kept putting in the work. Reports at the time described a strong, evolving relationship forming between Doncic and the new owner, built on conversations about the direction of the basketball team and what it would take to build a true contender in Los Angeles. It seemed, for a moment, like the dust was finally settling. Like maybe, just maybe, Luka had found some stability after years of anything but. The 2025 to 2026 season told a complicated story. On one hand, Doncic was brilliant. He led the entire NBA in scoring, averaging 33.5 points a night. A jaw-dropping number for anyone, let alone a player still adjusting to a new franchise and a new city. He was also putting up nearly 8 rebounds and more than 8 assists a game. Numbers that put him in truly rare company. This wasn't a player struggling to adapt. This was a superstar asserting himself as one of the very best in the world, night after night, in a city that demands nothing less than greatness. But basketball is a team sport, and no single player, no matter how brilliant, can carry a franchise alone forever. Injuries struck late in the season, knocking Doncic out for the final stretch of the regular schedule and, crushingly, all of the playoffs. The Lakers, who had retooled their roster around Doncic and Austin Reeves, were swept out of the second round by the Oklahoma City Thunder, a young, ruthless, rising team that many analysts believe represents the new standard in the Western Conference. It was a painful, humbling exit for a franchise that expects championships as a birthright. And then came a gut punch that had absolutely nothing to do with the scoreboard. LeBron James, the future Hall of Famer, the 4-time champion, the player many fans still consider the greatest to ever touch a basketball, left the Lakers in free agency. He signed with the Philadelphia 76ers. For a franchise that had built so much of its recent identity around LeBron's presence, this was seismic. It meant the Lakers were no longer just retooling around Luka Doncic. They were rebuilding around him completely. The keys to the kingdom, the full weight of an entire storied franchise, had shifted onto the shoulders of one 26-year-old point guard from Slovenia. If you're keeping score, that's already an ownership change, a coaching adjustment, a playoff heartbreak, and the departure of a legend, all within roughly a year and a half of Doncic arriving in Los Angeles. Most players never experience even one of those seismic shifts in a single season. Luka experienced almost all of them at once. And still, somehow, the story wasn't finished. Not even close. Because in August of 2026, barely 14 months after Mark Walter had taken control of the franchise, the Lakers were sold again. Let that sink in for a second. 14 months. That is how long it took for the Los Angeles Lakers, one of the crown jewels of professional sports ownership, to change hands not once, but twice. Walter agreed to sell his controlling stake to a group led by 2 extraordinarily powerful men, Bob Iger, the former chief executive of the Walt Disney Company, and Josh Kushner, the founder of Thrive Capital. The price tag this time was even more jaw-dropping than before, a record $12.5 billion. A full $2.5 billion more than what Walter himself had paid just over a year earlier. Shortly after, the Buss family voted to sell off the remaining piece of the team they still held, closing the book entirely on nearly 50 years of Buss family control. For NBA insiders, agents, and executives around the league, the news landed like a thunderclap. People who have spent decades around the business of basketball described being genuinely stunned, saying the news shocked absolutely everyone who follows the sport closely, because deals of this size and this speed simply do not happen in professional sports ownership circles. Now put yourself in Luka Doncic's shoes for a moment. Try to actually imagine it. You are 27 years old. You have played 9 seasons in the NBA. And in that time, the ownership group controlling your team has changed 5 separate times. 5. With the Dallas Mavericks, you went from playing for Mark Cuban, one of the most recognizable owners in all of sports, to suddenly playing for Patrick Dumont and the Adelson family after Cuban sold his stake. Shortly after that transition, you were traded away entirely, landing with the Lakers. Then, within your very first year in Los Angeles, the Buss family, custodians of the franchise for nearly half a century, sold to Mark Walter. And now, barely a year after that, Walter has already sold to Bob Iger and Josh Kushner. 5 ownership groups. 9 seasons. 1 player. It is not hard to see why some fans, some analysts, Some talking heads with big platforms and even bigger opinions started asking uncomfortable questions. If this level of turnover can happen at the very top of the organization, again and again, without warning, what does that mean for the players underneath it? What does it mean for Luka? Is anyone, even a superstar putting up MVP caliber numbers, truly untouchable when the people signing the checks keep changing? This is where the speculation begins to swirl. Because new ownership groups do not always want to inherit the previous group's plan. Sometimes they want their own vision, their own basketball people, their own direction. New owners, flush with cash and ambition after paying a record-breaking sum for a franchise, sometimes make sweeping changes, not just in the front office, but on the roster itself. It has happened before in professional sports. Legendary players have been moved not because they lost talent, but because a new regime wanted to build something in its own image. Could that happen with Luka Doncic? Let's be honest about what the evidence actually shows, rather than letting rumors run wild. On one hand, there are real reasons for Lakers fans to feel a flicker of nervousness. The pattern of instability is undeniable. 2 ownership changes in under 2 years is not normal. It creates uncertainty at every level of the organization, from the front office staff worrying about their jobs, to the coaching staff wondering who they will answer to next, all the way up to the players wondering whether the vision they signed up for will even exist a year from now. Under Walter's brief tenure, reports from The Athletic described the Lakers going through multiple rounds of layoffs and steep season ticket price increases, changes that many felt were more about business efficiency than basketball success. If an ownership group is willing to make dramatic changes to the business side that quickly, it is not unreasonable to wonder what happens if a new group decides the basketball side needs dramatic changes too. On the other hand, there is powerful evidence pointing in the exact opposite direction. Evidence that suggests trading Luka Doncic would be one of the most irrational decisions imaginable for any ownership group smart enough to spend $12.5 billion on a franchise in the first place. Think about why the Lakers were worth $12.5 billion in 2026 in the first place. A huge part of that number is tied directly to Luka Doncic. He is not just a great player. He is a global brand. He is one of the most marketable athletes in the sport, with massive followings across Europe and around the world, a rare talent capable of moving jerseys, moving television ratings, and moving the cultural needle in a way only a handful of players in any sport can manage. Any new ownership group buying the Lakers at a record valuation is, in part, buying access to the Luka Doncic era. Trading him away almost immediately would be like buying a mansion and then bulldozing the foundation. There is also the simple, undeniable basketball reality. Doncic led the entire NBA in scoring last season. He is not just a good player wearing a big name. He is, by the numbers, arguably the best offensive player alive right now. Front offices do not walk away from that kind of production in the prime of a player's career, especially not when that player is still only in his late 20s, with what should be the best years of his career still ahead of him. And then there is Luka himself. Because through every single one of these seismic shifts, through 5 ownership changes across 2 franchises, through injuries, through playoff heartbreak, through the departure of a legend like LeBron James, Luka Doncic has consistently sent one clear message. He wants to be in Los Angeles. He wants to build something there. He is not asking for a trade. He is not sulking. He is not demanding answers from ownership through leaked reports or anonymous quotes designed to pressure the front office. Instead, he has done the opposite. He has leaned in. When news of the Iger and Kushner purchase broke, Doncic didn't stay silent, and he didn't push out some carefully lawyered, corporate non-statement either. He posted directly, telling fans that being a Laker means everything to him, and that he is excited to get back on the court and chase a championship for Los Angeles. He acknowledged, almost with a kind of weary humor, that he has gotten used to big changes over the last few years. And then he said something that stuck with a lot of people who follow this team closely. He said there is no limit to the potential of this franchise, no matter who is steering the ship. That is not the language of a player looking for an exit. That is the language of a player planting a flag. And it goes beyond words. Doncic has been putting in real, tangible work this offseason to build the kind of chemistry and culture that championship teams need. With training camp approaching, he made the decision to host his entire roster for a minicamp, not in Los Angeles, not in some sunny basketball facility in California, but in his home country of Slovenia. Think about the significance of that. A superstar, in the middle of enormous organizational upheaval at the very top of his franchise, chose to bring his teammates halfway around the world to his own homeland, to bond, to build trust, to lay the groundwork for a title run under a Lakers team going through its second ownership change in as many years. That is not the behavior of someone hedging his bets. That is the behavior of someone trying to build something that lasts. There is also a quieter, more strategic layer to this story, one that basketball insiders have been paying close attention to. Under Walter's brief ownership, the Lakers were reportedly beginning to shift toward a more analytics-driven approach to decision-making, streamlining the front office so that fewer voices were involved in every basketball decision. According to reporting from The Athletic, Doncic himself had been in direct contact with ownership about the direction of the basketball operation, discussing roster building and the team's long-term vision. Walter's top baseball executives from the Dodgers organization, respected names in the sports business world, were also said to be increasingly involved in shaping the Lakers' basketball philosophy. The hope, according to those close to the situation, is that a cleaner, more efficient decision-making structure could actually help the Lakers move faster and smarter as they search for the right pieces to build around Doncic, rather than slower and more cautiously. If that structure survives the transition to Iger and Kushner, and there is reason to believe it might, given how much value the new ownership group is placing on stability and swift, confident decision-making, it could actually work in Luka's favor. A franchise with a clear plan, clear lines of authority, and a superstar who has already expressed a desire to be part of that plan, is a franchise far more likely to build around its best player than trade him away. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave the question we started with? Could the Lakers actually trade Luka Doncic if this new ownership situation doesn't go smoothly? The honest answer is that nobody outside a very small circle of decision-makers can say with total certainty what the future holds. Ownership changes are unpredictable by nature. New owners bring new priorities, and sometimes those priorities clash with the plans that came before them. The NBA has seen superstars moved before under circumstances nobody saw coming. History says you can never rule anything out completely, especially in a league where blockbuster trades have redefined entire franchises within a matter of hours. But when you actually step back and look at everything laid out in front of you, the trend line, the evidence, the actions, the words, everything points in one clear direction. Luka Doncic is not a player angling for a way out. He is a player fighting to be the cornerstone of a new era in Los Angeles, no matter how many times the names on the ownership paperwork change. He has been given every reason in the world to feel unsettled. 5 ownership groups, 9 seasons, countless questions about direction and stability. And through every bit of that chaos, he has responded not with frustration, but with commitment. Not with distance, but with leadership. Flying his teammates to Slovenia. Posting heartfelt messages to fans the moment uncertainty strikes. Staying in direct communication with the people steering the franchise, whoever those people happen to be at any given moment. For an incoming ownership group that just paid a record-breaking $12.5 billion for the Los Angeles Lakers, the presence of a superstar who has already proven, again and again, that he wants to stay and build something lasting, is not a problem to be solved. It is the single greatest asset they just acquired. Trading that away, especially this early, especially with a player still just entering the physical prime of his career, would be one of the strangest, most self-defeating decisions in modern sports business history. So cover your eyes if you want, Lakers fans. But maybe you shouldn't have to. Because underneath all the noise, underneath the shocking headlines and the record-breaking numbers and the relentless churn of ownership groups passing this franchise from hand to hand, there is one constant that hasn't moved an inch. Luka Doncic wants to be a Laker. He has said it. He has shown it. And as this new chapter under Bob Iger and Josh Kushner begins, all the evidence suggests that the Lakers, whoever ultimately signs the checks, understand exactly what they have in him. The story of Luka Doncic and the Los Angeles Lakers is still being written. Ownership will keep changing hands in professional sports. That is simply the nature of the business in this era of record-breaking valuations and billionaire investors circling the league's most valuable franchises. But some things are not for sale. A superstar's commitment. A city's love for its team. A young man from Slovenia who has been traded once already, who has watched 5 different ownership groups come and go, and who keeps choosing over and over again to stay all in. Whatever happens next in this remarkable, chaotic, historic stretch for the Los Angeles Lakers, one thing feels certain. Luka Doncic isn't going anywhere unless somebody makes one of the worst decisions in modern basketball history. And right now, everything he has said, everything he has done, and everything the numbers tell us, points to a very different future. Not an exit, not a trade, but a superstar, fully committed, ready to carry the purple and gold into whatever comes next. Let's slow down for a second, because there is more to this story than just the headlines and the dollar figures. To really understand why this moment feels so heavy for Lakers fans, you have to understand what the Buss family actually meant to that franchise, and why losing them twice over in a way feels like losing a piece of basketball history itself. Dr. Jerry Buss bought the Lakers back in 1979, and from that moment on, he built something that felt less like a corporation and more like a dynasty in the truest sense of the word. Showtime basketball. Magic Johnson. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Later, Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. Later still, LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Through all of it, through every era, every roster overhaul, every coaching change, the one constant was the name at the top of the letterhead. Buss. When Dr. Buss passed away, his daughter Jeannie stepped into that role, and for years she carried the weight of that legacy on her own shoulders, often fighting to keep the franchise unified even as her own siblings clashed over the direction of the team behind the scenes. Fans watched documentaries about those family battles. They saw just how personal, how emotional running that franchise had become for the people involved. So when the news broke that the Buss family was selling their controlling stake, it didn't just feel like a business transaction. It felt like the end of an era that had defined the entire sport of professional basketball for nearly half a century. And for a young superstar who had only just arrived in that world, who was still learning what it meant to wear the purple and gold, that transition landed differently than it might have for a player who had spent his whole career in that locker room. Luka didn't get years to soak in the Buss family era. He got a matter of months. Now picture the timeline laid out end to end, because when you see it all at once, it becomes almost impossible not to feel a little bit of sympathy for what this young man has had to navigate. February 2025, traded from Dallas to Los Angeles in one of the most shocking deals the league has ever witnessed. October 2025, barely 8 months later, his brand new franchise sells to an entirely new owner. Spring 2026, his season ends in heartbreak. A second-round sweep at the hands of a rising Oklahoma City Thunder team that many believe represents the future of the Western Conference. Summer 2026, LeBron James, one of the most important teammates and mentors a young star could ask for, packs up and leaves for Philadelphia. And then, just weeks later, August 2026, the franchise sells again, this time for a record-breaking $12.5 billion, to two of the most powerful men in global business. If you wrote that sequence of events into a movie script, executives would tell you to tone it down, that no single player could realistically go through that much upheaval in such a short window of time and still perform at an elite level. And yet, that is exactly what happened. That is exactly what Luka Doncic lived through. And somehow, through all of it, he still led the entire NBA in scoring. Let's talk about that Oklahoma City series for a moment, because it matters more to this story than people often realize. The Thunder didn't just beat the Lakers. They swept them, 4-0, in a way that felt less like a competitive playoff series and more like a changing of the guard. Oklahoma City, built through years of patient roster construction, deep draft capital, and a young core that had grown up together, looked like a team playing on a different level entirely. For a Lakers roster still trying to figure out its identity around a new superstar, it was a brutal, humbling wake-up call. It exposed how much work still needed to be done, not just on the roster, but in the front office decisions that would shape the years ahead. And it happened right as ownership uncertainty was already swirling in the background. That kind of on-court failure, paired with off-court instability, is exactly the recipe that can make fan bases nervous about the future of their franchise superstar. History has taught NBA fans to be cautious in moments like this. We have seen legendary players moved before under strange, unexpected circumstances. We have seen front offices blow up seemingly stable situations in pursuit of a different vision. It is not paranoid to wonder whether something similar could happen here. It is simply pattern recognition, born from decades of watching this league operate. But here's where it's worth pausing to really examine who exactly is now in charge of the Lakers, because the identities of Bob Iger and Josh Kushner matter enormously to how this story is likely to unfold. Bob Iger spent decades running one of the largest entertainment companies on the planet. He understands, probably better than almost anyone alive, the value of a global brand, of a beloved character, of an icon that fans have an emotional connection to. He did not build his career by tearing down the things audiences already loved. He built it by protecting them, expanding them, and finding new ways to let them shine on a bigger stage. If you apply that same instinct to the Lakers, to a superstar like Luka Doncic, who already has that kind of beloved, larger-than-life status among fans around the world, it becomes very hard to imagine Iger walking in and immediately blowing up the singular biggest asset the franchise currently has. Josh Kushner, meanwhile, built his reputation as an investor by identifying value early and holding on to it, backing long-term growth over short-term disruption. Investors of that caliber do not typically pay a record-breaking premium for an asset and then immediately dismantle the very thing that made the asset valuable in the first place. When you buy the Lakers for $12.5 billion, in large part because a former MVP-caliber scoring champion is signed to that roster in the prime of his career, the math simply does not support trading him away in year one. None of that means change won't come. New ownership groups almost always bring change somewhere in the organization. Front office restructuring, coaching evaluations, business side overhauls. Those things are almost guaranteed. But there is a meaningful difference between organizational change and trading away your single most valuable, most marketable, most productive player. One is standard practice in professional sports. The other would be an act of self-sabotage on a historic scale. And through it all, Luka keeps sending the same message, in ways both big and small. Consider the choice to bring his teammates to Slovenia for a mini-camp ahead of training camp. That is not a small gesture. That requires enormous logistical effort, flights, accommodations, coordinating an entire roster schedule around international travel just weeks before the grind of an NBA season begins. Players do not go through that kind of effort unless they genuinely believe in what they are building. Luka wasn't required to do that. Nobody in the front office mandated it. He chose to do it on his own because he wanted his teammates to know his world, to build the kind of trust that championship teams often talk about years later when they look back on what made their group special. That single decision tells you more about where Luka's head is at than almost any headline could. A player thinking about an exit does not fly his team to his childhood home to build chemistry for a season he might not finish there. A player thinking about an exit protects himself, keeps his circle small, minimizes his emotional investment in a situation he suspects might not last. Luka did the opposite. He opened the door wide. There is also something worth mentioning about how Doncic has handled the public side of all of this. In an era where superstar frustration often leaks out through anonymous sources, cryptic social media posts, or carefully placed reports designed to pressure ownership into action, Doncic has taken a strikingly different approach. His statements have been direct, attached to his own name, posted from his own account, with his own words. When the Iger and Kushner sale was announced, he didn't hide behind vague diplomatic language. He spoke plainly about his commitment to the city, to the fans, and to the pursuit of a championship. That kind of transparency is rare for a superstar navigating this much organizational chaos, and it speaks to a level of maturity and clarity about what he wants that should reassure, rather than worry, the people now running the franchise. So let's bring this back to the central question one more time, because it deserves a clear, honest answer before we wrap up. Will the Lakers ever consider trading Luka Doncic? Based on everything we know right now, the far more likely outcome is not a trade at all, but a full-scale commitment to building around him for the next decade. The financial incentives point that way. The basketball production points that way. The public statements from Doncic himself point that way. And the early signals from the incoming ownership group, still in the earliest days of their tenure, suggest a preference for stability at the superstar level, even as other parts of the organization get restructured around him. Could something change that calculus down the road? Of course. Sports are unpredictable. Ownership groups sometimes surprise everyone. But right now, in this moment, with the information available, the evidence overwhelmingly favors a Lakers franchise that is doubling down on Luka Doncic, not preparing to move on from him. What makes this story so compelling isn't just the billion-dollar business deals or the shocking headlines about ownership changing hands twice in 2 years. It's the human element sitting right at the center of it. A 27-year-old who left the only NBA home he ever knew, who has now watched 5 different ownership groups take control of the teams he plays for, who has weathered injuries, playoff heartbreak, and the departure of a legend, and who still, through all of it, keeps choosing to show up, keeps choosing to lead, keeps choosing Los Angeles. That kind of resilience is rare in professional sports. It's easy to stay committed when everything is going smoothly. It's much harder to stay committed when the ground keeps shifting beneath your feet, when the people cutting your paycheck keep changing, when the franchise you play for makes headlines for boardroom drama as often as it does for basketball. Luka Doncic has done exactly that, over and over again, and he shows no signs of stopping now. So the next time you see a headline asking whether the Lakers might trade Luka Doncic, remember everything we just walked through. Remember the Slovenia minicamp. Remember the heartfelt message posted the moment the sale was announced. Remember the scoring title he earned in the middle of all this chaos. And remember that billionaires do not typically spend $12.5 billion on a franchise just to throw away its most valuable piece before they've even unpacked their offices. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned, because this Lakers ownership story is far from over.